Prabhupada came, he sat on the Vyasasana, and the first question, right, bang, was, reporter asked, so what's going to happen to the movement after you die? And before the words were even out of his mouth, he hadn't even finished his sentence, Prabhupada said, I will never die. Long pause. I will live forever in my books. I remember also Prabhupada going back to Australia. When Prabhupada would arrive, I would always make sure all the press knew about it, and they were quite responsive. They would show up at the airport and follow him to the temple. It was always a media event when Prabhupada arrived. And one occasion, Prabhupada arrived, and the reporter spent quite a bit of time with him. He was a reporter for the Melbourne Age, which is the largest daily newspaper in Melbourne. And Prabhupada would always, he would treat them as individuals. He wasn't giving a media package, something slick for reproduction in the papers. He was trying to get them to be Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada spent a lot of time, and I was there, and he really, really, really gave this fellow a lot of mercy. And then the article that came out the next day had a picture of him. It said, Swami says he'll be an animal in his next life. And we were just aghast at the ingratitude and the dullness of this fellow. And we came and we were upset, and we showed the article. Look what he's written after all. And Prabhupada just smiled. And he asked me, he said, Caru, he said, count the number of times that Krishna is mentioned in the article. I don't know what it was, 8 or 10 times. And he said, what is the circulation? I don't remember, 500,000, maybe not that many, 200,000 or 300,000. How many people read it? And then we figured, and then we came up with a figure, 500, 600, 700,000 times the number of, so it turned out that the name of Krishna was repeated or read more than 1 million times as a result of that article. So he said, how can that be bad? The name of Krishna has been intoned mentally and verbally more than 1 million times on this day. So that cannot be bad. Prabhupada, the whole temple room in the Lotus Building was packed, and Prabhupada was giving the lecture. And he said, he just had a moment there when he looked out on all these young kids, 20 years old, and he said, and you got a sense of how exciting every day was for him, preaching Krishna consciousness, captaining a world movement, and exciting for all of us who participate in it. And so Prabhupada, he just said, I am an old man. He said, I may go any time. He said, but there are hundreds of you, and you're young men, and all of you have at least 50 years left. And he was transcendently envious of us, that he was going to have to go, and we all had 50 years, and he just started crying out of sheer enthusiasm to preach. Before Prabhupada first personally came to visit us in Australia, we had a couple of his books. We had the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know if we had the Krishna book, but we knew something of him as an author, and one always tends to think of the author as a person and then his works as being two separate things. I mean, this is his work, and then one is curious to know what the person's like. You read a modern author, John Grisham, and say, okay, that's what he wrote, that's his fiction or fantasy, and what's the fellow like? And so I had wondered what would Prabhupada be like in person, having read his commentaries and so on and so forth. And first time Prabhupada came to Australia, he stayed, I think it was only 4 days. And I was in charge at that time. Later Mohananda came and Madhavisa came, but I think the first time it was pretty much just me. And I was with him more than anybody. And it didn't matter whether I was in the room with him alone or whether there were 20 or 30 people. He was personification of the Bhagavatham and the Gita. There wasn't any difference between his work and himself. He was truly the person Bhagavat. And I think I had, very early on the realization that one needn't be in the physical presence of Prabhupada. because Prabhupada is perfectly and completely present in his books, and there is no difference between Prabhupada and his books. And so I always had plenty of inspiration, in my devotional life, because I never had a problem with that, I mean, Prabhupada leaving the planet was the worst day of my life. But still, everything was still there. Everything was still there. The books, the senior devotees, our international society, our vision, our goal, our inspiration. And to this day, I haven't faltered for any lack of inspiration.